The Pascagoula abduction. What really happened? Find somewhere comfortable, because this one happened in broad sight of a river, a road, and a working town. No remote forest, no empty highway. Just two men, a fishing line, and a Thursday evening in October that neither of them ever fully recovered from. Part 1. The River. The Pascagoula River moves slowly through the southern edge of Mississippi, dark and tannin-stained, the color of old tea. In October, the air is still warm enough to fish after work, and that is exactly what Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker were doing on the evening of October 11th, 1973. Hickson was 42, a shipyard foreman, the kind of man who measured things carefully and spoke only when he had something worth saying. Parker was 19, recently arrived in Mississippi from the small town of Laurel, quiet by nature and newer to this part of the world. They knew each other from work. They were not particularly close. They were simply two men sharing a riverbank and a cooler, and an evening that, by every reasonable expectation, should have ended with nothing more notable than the drive home. The time was approximately 9 o'clock when they heard it. A sound, described later as a zipping hiss, low and mechanical, rose from somewhere behind them. Both men turned toward the western bank. Hovering above the water, no more than 30 feet away, was an oval-shaped craft, elongated, silent now, emanating a pale blue-white light that fell across the river's surface without reflecting the way light should reflect on water. It simply hung there, and then it opened. Part 2. What came out? 3 figures emerged. They were roughly 5 feet tall, and they moved without walking, gliding across the bank with a mechanical stillness that Hickson would later describe as more frightening than their appearance. Their skin was pale and deeply wrinkled, like old leather or the hide of something ancient. Where eyes should have been, there were small conical protrusions. Their mouths were thin slits. Their hands were fused, lobster-like, claw-shaped, and they moved their arms without any visible joint articulation. They looked like nothing that had ever been reported before. Calvin Parker fainted. He was 19 years old and his body simply gave out beneath him. He collapsed onto the bank of the Pascagoula River and did not regain full consciousness until it was over. Hickson could not move. Not restrained, simply unable to respond to anything his mind told his body to do. 2 of the figures lifted him by the arms. The grip was light, almost careful. He was carried aboard the craft and suspended horizontally in a room filled with sourceless white light. An object, oval, mechanical, something approximating a large, unblinking eye, passed slowly over his body from head to foot. There was no pain, no sound, just the examination, conducted in absolute silence by things that had no expression to offer and no explanation to give. He believed it lasted 20 minutes. Then he was back on the bank. Parker was beside him, conscious, trembling. The craft was gone. The river moved on, indifferent, as it always had. Part 3. The Sheriff's Office. What Hickson and Parker did next is, for many who have studied this case, the detail that resists easy dismissal. They did not go home. They did not call anyone. They sat in Hickson's car beside the river for the better part of an hour before Hickson made a decision. They were going to report it, not because they expected to be believed, but because Hickson, a practical man, believed that something had happened and that it ought to be on record somewhere. At the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, Captain Glenn Ryder and Sheriff Fred Diamond listened carefully. Then they applied a standard investigative technique. They placed both men alone in a room, told them they'd return shortly, and left a concealed recording device running. The tape still exists. What it captured was not two men quietly aligning their accounts. It captured Parker weeping, telling Hickson he wanted to go home, that he was frightened, that nobody would believe them. It captured Hickson trying to calm the younger man down, his own voice low and strained. At one point, apparently speaking to no one, Hickson said, "I know it happened. I know it did." Neither man knew they were being recorded. Both agreed to polygraph examinations. Hickson passed. Parker, still too distressed to complete the procedure, was not formally assessed. Dr. J. Allen Hynek, the Northwestern University astronomer who had spent 2 decades investigating UFO reports for the United States Air Force, traveled to Pascagoula to interview Hickson in person. He was not a credulous man. He had spent much of his career providing rational explanations for reported sightings. His assessment of Hickson was simple. The man was either telling the truth, or he was the most composed and consistent liar Hynek had encountered in 20 years of this work. Hynek did not believe he was lying. Part 4. The Silence. Calvin Parker did not speak publicly about what happened at the Pascagoula River that night for more than 40 years. He gave no interviews. He sought no attention. He returned to a quiet life and stayed there, the way people sometimes do when something happens that they have no framework to process and no expectation of being understood. In 2018, at the age of 64, he published a book. In it, he described experiences aboard the craft that he had never disclosed, not to investigators, not to researchers, and not to Hickson. Details he had held privately for 4 decades because, he said, he did not believe anyone would accept them even having accepted everything else. Charles Hickson told his story consistently until his death in 2011. The shape of the craft, the texture of the beings, the way they crossed the bank without their feet touching the ground. He told it at 42 in a Mississippi sheriff's office, and he told it the same way at 79. Not one detail shifted. Not one element was embellished. For a fabricated account, it showed a remarkable lack of the kind of growth that fabricated accounts tend to accumulate over time. Skeptics raised reasonable objections. The beings described by Hickson are unlike any entity reported in the broader UFO literature, a detail that some researchers cite as evidence of invention and others cite as evidence of authenticity. No physical trace was recovered from the bank. No independent witnesses came forward that night. Then, years later, a woman named Maria Blair stated that on the evening of October 11th, 1973, she had been driving the road adjacent to the river when she observed an unusual light hovering above the water. She had not stopped. She had not reported it. She had assumed, she said, that someone else must have seen it too. Someone had. Part 5. The bank. The Pascagoula River is still there. The bank is unremarkable. Scrub grass, dark water, the distant sound of the road. People still fish there on warm October evenings, the same way 2 men did on a Thursday night more than 50 years ago. What stays with you, in the end, is not the craft or the beings or the tape recording in the sheriff's office. It is the simplicity of what Hickson and Parker were doing when it happened. They were fishing. They were tired from work. They had nowhere particular to be, and something found them anyway. Whether that something was real, or whether 2 ordinary men experienced something that the mind under the right kind of stress, in the right kind of darkness, is capable of generating entirely on its own, is a question that the evidence has never cleanly resolved. The river doesn't offer opinions. It just keeps moving. Sleep well, my friend.